to All Things Health and Abundance podcast. This is the podcast where we discuss different health and abundance related issues and come with real tips and advice. And today we're going to talk about ayahuasca. What is ayahuasca? What does a ceremony look like? How can one heal through the power of ayahuasca? This and much more is what we'll be discussing today. And today with me is Sophia Vasiliou, founder of The Awakened Potential. Sophia has an honors degree in ancient history. She holds certifications in crystal therapy, Swedish massage, and level 3 Reiki training. Sophia is a preferred psychic facilitator as well as a certified emotion code and body code practitioner. She helps her clients make significant shifts in how they see the world and how the world sees them. Sophia has completed a 3-year shamanic apprenticeship with an indigenous Shipibo shaman in the Peruvian Amazon. While working at the Ayahuasca Foundation, Sophia gained unique insights into the psycho-spiritual connection to physical health, assisting people in the recovery from many issues such as addiction, trauma, allergies, and skin conditions. So, Sophia, I'm really happy to have you here with us today. I have myself been to some ayahuasca ceremonies, but I've never had the process of integration, the work of before and after the ceremonies. And I really feel that I've missed this integration process. So I'm really excited to be talking about this today. Thank you for accepting to be here today and talk about this.
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm really looking forward to this chat as well.
Can you tell us about yourself, your journey, and your work?
So, I am a holistic therapist. I have been working with people in various modes of alternative healing really since I was a child. I would work on my sister when she had a knee injury, and I would be sort of surrounded by crystals. It's just always been inside me. I have training in various modalities, and my full-time work now is mainly working with what I call epigenetic reprogramming, which is reprogramming the subconscious mind to let go of limiting beliefs and create the life that you want by understanding that you have much more agency in your life. Because when you believe certain things, that's the world you create. And when I was 32, I was going through a bit of a crisis emotionally and mentally myself, and sort of ayahuasca, which is something I've wanted to do for a very long time, just sort of came on my radar really strongly. And I found a ceremony in the UK, which I went to drink at for a weekend. It was 2 or 3 ceremonies. And I had some breakthroughs. I had some really interesting shifts and insights. And I realized I wanted to do it in an indigenous context. This felt like something was really not quite right for me in a certain way. And I'm still externally grateful for those ceremonies, because the thing that it gave me was the courage to basically, throw a hand grenade into my life and move to the Amazon. So
wow. It takes courage.
Yes and no. Again, it's one of those integration 101 things where I would always suggest to people that they pause and take time to make massive life-altering decisions after drinking, because you are still in a very open state where you might not be seeing things. You see some things extraordinarily clearly, and you might see other things with very jaded perception, where you feel like you have to just get rid of things instead of trying to fix them. And so I would always suggest people exercise caution. But then at the same time, I drank in August, and I didn't leave the country until December. And went to Peru to the Ayahuasca Foundation to do a 6-week retreat in the jungle. And I had no intention of learning part of that retreat was actually learning about curandismo, learning the arts of holding a ceremony and sort of really immersing into that medicine paradigm. For me, I was just going, it was the longest thing I could find, and I knew I needed a lot of help. And so I went there for 6 weeks. And the healing and the shifts that I went through in those 6 weeks, I was just so blown away. I felt like a new human, and I decided to stay there. I got offered a job, and so I stayed at the center working and facilitating other people's retreats and their journeys. And in that process, I was an interpreter for the curandero, where he would talk about the mechanics of ceremony and their healing paradigm. We would administer many different medicines and different kinds of purgatives, and sort of from the jungle pharmacy rather than the ayahuasca. So they weren't hallucinogenics, they were just there to clean out the body, mind and soul in many different ways. And I would also be sat next to the curandero drinking every other night.
That
For
must have
six
been
weeks at
quite
a time.
strong.
Yeah, it's like 6 weeks at a time, 10-week courses we would do. And then there were shorter healing retreats, which were sort of 2 or 3 weeks long, but it's an every other night drinking schedule. And I was there from like 2015 to the end of 2017. Then I came back, learned a couple of other modalities which really access the subconscious to rewire the brain in a slightly less intense way, which I find really useful for people's integration journeys, and just sort of helping people in a different way who can't access the jungle, or it's not appropriate, or combine, the lessons you learn with ayahuasca. Sometimes you just learn the issue. So I struggle asking for help. What I can do with my other healing tools is, we can install a new belief. It's easy and joyful for me to ask for help. I understand that asking for help gives other people a gift because they can help me.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of work I do outside of working with people to help them prepare for and integrate their ayahuasca journeys.
Wow, that's very interesting. Can you explain in simple terms what ayahuasca is and what an ayahuasca ceremony looks like?
So what ayahuasca is a combination usually of two plants. So you have the ayahuasca vine and a leaf called chacruna. And when they combine together, they create a brew that contains DMT, which is one of the strongest hallucinogenic substances or psychedelic substances on the planet, which we also create inside our bodies. The fusion of those two elements means that it's orally digestible. So normally if you have DMT and eat it, many plants actually contain it. It would be broken down immediately by the stomach and do nothing. But when the ayahuasca vine is combined with the DMT plant, it actually stops those enzymes in the stomach breaking it down. And so you actually are able to slowly absorb this DMT and have a journey that lasts 4 to 6 hours. The only other way to take DMT is actually to smoke it, which lasts 10 to 20 minutes. So that's the difference. It's a psychedelic brew that's used traditionally in the Amazon by many cultures across South America in different ways.
And what does the ceremony look like?
So because there's many different tribes that use ayahuasca, each ceremony style will be quite different. The paradigm in which I was trained is a Shipibo ceremony, and they live in sort of northern Peru, getting closer to the Colombian border. And ceremonies with them are completely dark, like pitch black, once you've drunk your ayahuasca. And there's silence for a while until the effects of the medicine touch the shaman. Oh, curandero would be a better word actually for the healers in the Amazon. Shaman is a word that comes from Siberia, and they prefer to be referred to as curanderos.
Oh, wow. Okay. I wasn't aware of that. Interesting.
Yeah, we've kind of transposed the word here to sort of cover all bases, and we use the word shamanism as a term, but yeah, that's not quite appropriate, is a difficult word. But yeah, curandero would be a better word.
Yeah.
And it also speaks to what they do. So when the effects of the medicine as it's called in many circles, as if the effects of the ayahuasca touch the curandero, they start to sing. And their songs are a completely a cappella. There's no instruments. Sometimes they'll have a rattle made of leaves to accompany them, sometimes not. My shaman really didn't like using anything except his voice. And he'll be singing for a few hours. And what he's doing is initially he's protecting the space and creating a container for the ceremony. And then all of his plant allies that he's spent, a decade connecting with to get powers in the other realm where the journey of the ayahuasca takes place, those form energy lines through the body and give him strength in that world. And as he's getting high, for want of a better word, he then sends out those energy lines to the patients in the room who then are connected to him. And so the journey is a space in which everything happens with everyone connected to the shaman as an anchor point. And then from there, what he's singing is he's asking the plants to do things, but he's also narrating what they're doing and sort of commenting and then looking and to see where an illness has started in somebody, and then he asks someone or something to clean it. And he's sort of multitasking hardcore, doing, I've seen in ceremony him working on one person, sort of you can see his energy body in front of one person and someone else at the same time and holding the entire space. It's a very strange space.
Wow.
But that's a traditional Shipibo ceremony. In Brazil, they're quite celebratory and people dance. There's also the Daime churches where, it's much more of a religious looking ritual where, the men and the women are separate in the space and they drink and they dance and they pray, and it's a constant interaction for the whole night. So there's not one archetypal ceremony. And then you have all the Western stuff that happens now where people kind of gather and drink and sing nice songs, and, it's changing and it's evolving.
Wow. So no instruments. Actually, what I have tried in all the ceremonies I've been to, there were instruments, there was a lot of singing, and men and women were divided. So I had no knowledge of what you described right now. But it's amazing that actually, let's call it the shaman, he or she holds space for everyone and does so many things at the same time while singing for hours a cappella. It's really amazing.
Mm-hmm. And so when they're gaining their powers and connecting with their plant allies in the other realm, it's a process called dieta or diet. Mm-hmm. And what often happens is they'll be given melodies. So that's one of the first ways the plants start to communicate with them is through these melodies. And so their songs, the words change, but the melodies are really important, and they kind of shift the dimensions and energy in a room. And it's quite magical to watch.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, that actually I can relate to the different melodies, and somehow it would feel like you are in a forest and then you're somewhere else, even though you are in a room. So I can relate to that. What do people usually see and experience in an ayahuasca ceremony?
I mean, that question is almost impossible to answer because it's so different for everybody.
I know, but I still felt that I had to ask this question for the person who has never been in a ceremony.
So the archetypal thing that most people hear about is the visions, what they see, and this sort of experience of being in other worlds and seeing cosmic things happening in other realms. Is quite rare, actually, that people see that. But also the other very famous thing that ayahuasca does, it kind of takes you inwards and you kind of can see your life and how you've contributed to other people's pain or discomfort, or how your issues and things that you're trying to work within ceremony, you kind of understand your part in them, other people's part in them, and sort of have this whole deconstruct of things coming up to let go of. For some people it is a very visual experience. For me it's not at all. I don't see anything ever.
What happens in your case?
It's really hard to describe. It's almost like a untuned TV set where you might have a sense of a shadow or a something
Mm-hmm.
sort of underneath the fuzz on the screen. It's almost like that. It's sort of, I can tell something's around. So I normally have a lot of interaction with beings, but again, I was drinking primarily in the Amazon, and so I was surrounded by the jungle. My curandero, we were learning to actually connect and have our own dietas and our own relationships with the plants. And so
Mm-hmm.
they would often be in ceremony with me and they'd be talking, or, it was more a verbal thing or a sensation thing. You start to feel something in your body and you go in and you say, okay, what is this about? And then all these thoughts. So it's very similar to the experience of, say, channeling information, or just, things
Mm-hmm.
coming to you with a slightly external voice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. It makes total sense. Is it possible for someone to have both?
Yeah. Yeah. Many people have sort of, different kinds of experience, and many people have different experience in different ceremonies. One can be really, really visual and quite, like movies playing in front of them. And then the next one, they're sort of really in their body, bringing up stuff that's been stuck in the cells, ready to release with the famous kind of purging, which is
Yeah.
usually vomiting or going to the bathroom. What experiences did you have?
Actually, both. I remember that in my very first ceremony, well, I saw a dragon and I became the dragon, so a lot of things. And then I need to go to the toilet. I've never purged, like, I've never been throwing up, but I have to go to the toilet.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hearing, ask for help. And I was thinking, no, I can't ask for help to go to the toilet. Maybe I can crawl there, as if that was less humiliating in my head. So actually crawling to the toilet was less humiliating than asking for help for me. So I'm still working after quite some years. I'm still working with asking for help, but I became aware of it, how difficult it is for me to ask for help. But I think it has been both, also being in my body, but also just actually not remembering anything, but just having this feeling of happiness. So
Mm-hmm.
I've had different experiences, very different from each other. I remember after my first time, it was quite easy in comparison to what I was expecting. So I thought, oh, that's it, but this is easy. So I went quite with an ego probably to the next one. And it wasn't as easy. So I think I've had different experiences to the point that I thought I was dying. Yeah, it has always been different, like you said. But
Yeah.
usually it brings up all the issues maybe you don't know about, it uncovers them, or issues you're working with. At least that's my experience.
Yes. And, it's a good observation for you to see about the lesson about asking for help.
Yeah.
That is, the way we behave in ceremony when faced with certain really difficult points is a teaching that goes beyond what's happening in that room on that weekend or on that night.
Mm.
I think that's really important to understand about the process of drinking ayahuasca, is that it's not just about what's happening there, it's about how you then use that information and choose to integrate it and learn from it, which give
Mm.
you the gold, which actually give you the benefit.
But it's amazing that things actually can come up, a lot of things after the ceremony. Things kept coming up even 3, 4 months after.
Mhm.
It's really amazing.
Have you heard of Gabor Mate?
Yeah, I've heard of him. Like I've checked some stuff on YouTube, basically.
Yeah, so there's a famous quote from him, which is this: the work of the ceremony starts afterwards. And if you don't
Oh,
do that, you've wasted your time. It's a very bad paraphrasing, but he says the entire work of the ceremony is actually the aftermath.
I'm so happy I know about that now. So next time I know where to go. So basically to you to integrate that. So I don't like this next question, but I think I have to ask it. How is it different from different psychedelics? And why I don't like it is that I don't consider ayahuasca a psychedelic, even though there is DMT connected to it or released in the body. I don't consider it a psychedelic, but I believe I have to ask this question nevertheless for people that have never tried it.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. It's a question that needs asking and addressing for sure. And I think the answer really depends on your worldviews in a way. So for me, psychedelic substances, traditionally LSD, magic mushrooms, those kind of things. It's really hard to describe. To me, ayahuasca and mushrooms are closer on a category than
Mm.
the synthetics, for a start. I think the historical context in which ayahuasca has been used, the fact that it was done in ceremony and there's evidence for it being done for thousands of years, I think at least 1000 BC is some of the oldest paraphernalia for ayahuasca that they found, and it might be further back than that
Mm-hmm.
in the Amazon. I think that creates a container, it's like a collective consciousness around what ayahuasca is and how it's used, that sort of, yeah, it's like an intangible thing that exists in its own right. And then psychedelics, the purpose of psychedelics for most people is to get out of your head, explore other realms and go into this sort of, you know, fun land. And not everyone uses them like that, but that's, there's this sort of flippant usage is quite common, whereas something like ayahuasca, and for me, magic mushrooms as well, there's this sacredness, there's this intentionality of going internally. And really, I think one fear that a lot of my clients have is, if they've had experience with something like mushrooms or acid, they're worried that they're going to wander off during ceremony and just want to
Mm-hmm.
explore the natural world. And I said, you don't have to worry about that. Ayahuasca will just execute on your mat. You are forced into this process. You will go inside. You'll not be thinking in the slightest of disappearing anyway. You're just kind of nailed to your mat,
Yes.
doing your thing.
True.
Yeah, and it's just this entirely different experience where you're just so, even if you're exploring the cosmos, it's like such an internal journey, and it's fascinating really how it works. It's not that you can't use your legs, although many people struggle with being able to move sort of
Mm-hmm.
coherently. Um, but yeah, it's just very different, and I think the next element where sort of synthetics versus natural substances that cause visionary substances, we'll call them. The fact that we're communicating with spirits, and for me, that is something that I've seen a lot of skeptics drink ayahuasca, and by the end of a 6-week retreat, they're like, I kind of believe in the spirits too because I've seen them and I've spoken to them. So I think that's another aspect of this particular plant brew that we does need addressing in people's psyches, that we are communing with other intelligences of another frequency, and that needs
Mm-hmm.
respect.
Yeah, I totally agree. And thank you so much for the description. Are there any risks connected to it?
Yes. So people should always go somewhere where the person giving you the ayahuasca gives you a really good sort of basic health checkup in terms of mental health issues in your
Mm-hmm.
family. You're going back a few generations for sure. People with a history of schizophrenia or other mental disorders in the family, it's very unadvisable to drink,
Oh.
because if there are weaknesses in the psyche, drinking ayahuasca can just blast it open and people can have psychotic breaks. If you're going somewhere and they're not giving you a health checkup, checking what medications you're on, because it's an MAOI, which that's the inhibitor in the stomach that stops the DMT being broken down, but that also stops other things happening. So if you're on antidepressants like Prozac or things like that, you can have a really adverse reaction. Also checking what's in the brew, because other, people can add other substances. Tobacco is quite common because there's
Mm-hmm.
a tobacco in the jungle that's wild, causes a much more elevated heart rate. And so the risks for people who have heart conditions would be much higher if there's tobacco in the brew. People add other substances which have more DMT, one being brugmansia, and that can cause proper hallucinations rather than visions. And that can be a very difficult, people love those ceremonies because the medicine's so strong, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also a much higher risk in terms of the sort of possibility of a psychotic break or other mental breakdown after the ceremony. So yeah, it's not a game in my opinion.
No, no. And I guess, or I actually believe it is not advised to do it with someone that is not experienced with without a curandera. So just a group of friends taking the plant,
Yes,
taking the
I
medicine.
strongly agree with that. And this is another massive controversial issue with the fact that, ayahuasca is spreading rapidly throughout the world, like the vine that she is.
Yeah.
Uh, so, there's a lot of ways that you can protect yourself, checking out what training the people have who are serving it to you and things like that, just to make sure that they know what's happening in the space. We had a
Hmm.
saying in the jungle, it's okay until it's not.
Hmm.
And you could do 10 ceremonies, it's fine. You're singing your, healing or medicine songs, but you're not in control of the space. You're not able to actually see what's happening. You're not able, you might be drinking in a place where the land spirits are particularly ferocious and they're really angry that you've brought a non-native something happening in the space. Nothing to do with the ceremony, that just causes chaos that you just don't know. And if the person serving the medicine can't see that and control it, it's and 95% of the time something like that won't happen, but when it does, no one knows what's wrong.
What could happen then?
I mean, it could be just everyone in the ceremony, purging for hours. I've seen,
Wow.
um, not to get too freaky about it, but, if there's entities or, other kind of spirit beings being released from a patient and it's not controlled, that can just go and affect all of the other patients in the room. And so whilst they're under the effects of the ayahuasca, pretty much lose their minds, just
Mm.
be screaming and crying and in these crazy, actually just seemingly crazy, and
Mm.
it wears off. And then sometimes there's after effects to that. Some of my integration people, even when they were drinking with shamans from Colombia, something escaped in the room, or the person I'm thinking of had a very traumatic memory come up during the ceremony, and it was from their very early childhood, and they didn't have enough support coming to terms with that. And actually, when I saw them a couple of weeks later, they'd got to the point where they couldn't think straight, they were losing their memory, they were unable to really function very easily. What I saw is, their spirit was, halfway out their body, like they dissociated during the memory and never really came back.
Wow.
And so,
Okay.
we did one session and got her back in her body, and then her memory came back and she was able to function and she was whole again. And we worked a couple of times after that just to process the experience. But these things can happen.
So it's really important to actually go to a ceremony with someone who knows how to hold space. It's not just about the amount of ceremonies this person has been holding.
In my opinion, yes, I'm sure other people would disagree, but in my opinion, yes, that's proper training, proper understanding of the forces with which you're playing, and you're in their space. It's a little bit like going under the sea to a journey. You're in a different environment, you need to respect the environment that you're in.
Yeah, I totally agree. And how does the healing happen? And on what level is it? Is it physical, mental, spiritual?
So again, this will depend on the paradigm that you're drinking in. So for the shipibo, the ayahuasca and the ceremonies, just one part of an entire medicinal paradigm, which is mainly about physical health for them. So they will drink, they will see what's going on in their patients, and the ceremony for them is almost like doing x-rays. And as I said, they'll be directing the plant spirits to clean out usually repetitive thoughts and sort of head spirals. And sort of they'll see in that kind of x-ray scan that, like, oh, the beginning of your issue of your physical health started there. The plants will give them recipes of medicines they need to make, and then they'll be in treatment for a number of days or weeks where they'll get medicines made from plants in the jungle, maybe sort of steam sauna type things or compresses. And so it's, physical health that they're mainly dealing with, understanding that there are psychological or emotional reasons that also underlie it. In other contexts, sort of most people in the West drink because they want sort of this idea of, spiritual openings or emotional healing.
Mm.
And that's about their own personal journeys on the mat, which, are massive, going in with intentions for your own understanding. Sort of the way I coach people for preparation is, try and ask the right questions, like asking, like, help me see how I sabotage myself in my life, or help me understand why I can't complete X, or, you're sort of asking for a dialogue
Mhm.
and sort of trying to see your blocks or how you've contributed to whatever. So we sort of shifted because it's about us and our journeys rather than going to somebody for help for an issue. We've shifted the focus of the ceremony, and which is fine. I think it's a beautiful way that we're learning to work with these altered states and get advice from beings who see things very differently to us. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, yeah, it does. So you can actually ask the medicine beforehand to show you certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of make a plan of what you want to experience or what you want to get answers about.
So I normally suggest that people, especially the week leading up to the ceremony, start to disconnect from the outside stuff and start to go within.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time, really consider why are you drinking? What do you want to get out of the ceremony? For what reason are you undertaking this, spiritual journey? And really start to kind of go inwards and understand that. And then, from your why, you can get to a place of, okay, so if that's what I want overall, what questions could I ask that will help me get closer to that goal
Mm-hmm.
of understanding?
I understand. I don't think I've quite done that work beforehand. I was just saying that I'm open to whatever I need to know. I
Mm-hmm.
was scared of a certain trauma of drowning that I experienced when I was around 4 years old. So somehow deep down, I was asking not to experience that. And so far, I haven't. So she has been really gentle, I
Mm-hmm.
think, but I've always gone in with the fear of experiencing it, to be honest. But probably she would just show you what you can handle, right? So if I'm not ready to handle it, then she
Most of
wouldn't.
the time.
Okay, but not always.
Most of the time, yes. I mean, there is a lot of trust in the space, and but there's also this idea that, everything's perfect and it's always right and exactly what you need. And I think that's quite a dangerous mindset, because sometimes, as I said, things happen that are completely not to do with you and your journey in a space. And
Yeah.
it's other stuff at play. And just to say, oh, everything's perfect, exactly what you need, 10 people in the ceremony lost their minds and it's fine. So there's most of the time, the way it happens and what unfolds is perfectly just for you, and the way it
Mm.
works is for you. And there also needs to be acknowledgement that sometimes things happen that were too much. That, one thing I say to people is, you can talk to her in the ceremony. If things are happening too fast or they're too intense, you can say, hey, hang on, I'm just human. Please slow down. It's
Mm.
dialogue. It's actually a co-created space. It's you're interacting with a being. And this is why, for me, that paradigm is so important, because many people think they're just a passive recipient of the ceremony. It's just what happens. But actually, when you engage, when you start to realize that you have agency in that space, you can work with it and transform it. Like, whoa, that's too much. Or hang on, I didn't get that. Can we go back? Can you show me a different way?
A communication.
Yeah, it's a dialogue. It's a conversation.
I remember actually saying a couple of times, okay, this is too much. Can you please slow down? And yeah, that she really takes it easier. Now it's coming back to me. I haven't done it in a couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
so it was a bit of a distant memory, but yeah, that's true. Makes sense. So this is how someone prepares for it, but how can one integrate the learnings?
So,
afterwards?
so for me, one of the most important tools for integration is writing down a lot of the stuff whilst you're still in the space or in the retreat space in which you drank the ayahuasca in the first place, because it has a very dreamlike quality. There are some things that will stick in your mind really strongly from the ceremony, and
Mm,
other things that sort of like the details or just like small insights or rememberings or just like ahas that within a few days you'll probably forget if you haven't written them down.
like a dream.
Very much like a dream. And so if you're out of that space, just like a dream, you know, when you have a dream journal and you write in bed still lying down with your eyes shut, you remember way more than if you've actually moved, because you're still closer to that liminal state.
Mhm.
um, and so when you take yourself out of the ceremony environment, the details fall away faster. So the first thing I recommend to do is journal or voice note or something to get your thoughts down whilst you're still very much connected to the space, because that will be a really good reference for you later on down the journey. Like you said, 2 or 3 months later, you're still getting insights, but you could also be in a more tricky place in your integration process. So the first thing is sort of, yeah, making even just bullet points of your top 10 insights from the
Mhm.
ceremony would be great. If you can't, you know, if you don't like doing sort of long form writing, but just bullet points and having them around you as a memory, like just on the fridge to remind you of
Wow.
what you went through, I think could be really helpful. Because I'm not sure if you experienced this, but for many people, ayahuasca is a very peak experience. You feel open, you're in this group environment where everyone's
Mm.
really loving and connected, and you feel amazing because you're heard, you're seen, you've opened up and felt things in a way that you haven't felt before, and you're just like, yes, this is beautiful, this is what life's
Mm.
about. And then you go home and no one's changed in your normal environment. You've
Yeah.
been away for a weekend, no one knows that you've had this sort of like exponential growth happening. And so they're talking to you about the latest soap or celebrity or the weather. And you're like, huh? And it can be a really big crash landing for some people if they're not ready
Yeah,
to
that's true.
realize. Yeah.
Yeah.
So having those reminders, having that sort of sense of, oh, this, I did experience that, can be really, really important, because you can feel like everything's just washing off you for the first week or two whilst the experience is still really fresh and you've got that glow in your chest. And then it's like 4 weeks later when, so in the 4 to 6 week period, the brain stops being so plastic. So as you're in ceremony, the the nerve pathways shift and change. You're actually able to sort of re-perceive things and create new possibilities of thought. And that's called neuroplasticity. And that continues for 4 to 6 weeks after the ceremony. So if you're practicing your new insights, if you're actually remembering the ways you thought during the ceremony, and sort of, if you imagine you're walking in a forest pathway, like in the ceremony you cut the pathway, if you keep treading
Mhm.
that pathway for the next 4 weeks, that's more likely to stay open than if you just make the pathway and then go and walk somewhere else where the trees then overgrow. Practicing your insights, doing things differently, just even remembering the feelings and meditating on what you felt and experienced in those 4 to 6 weeks, you'll cement those pathways so they become more permanent roads. And that
Mm.
is really important. And then after that is when I call it the afterglow,
Yeah.
kind of drops, and you start to feel like, oh, you know, everything gets that gray tinge again. You kind of go back into the old ways of thinking, of feeling, especially if you haven't done this practice. And for many people, you know, that journey from being in this wonderful, open, glorious space back into normal, or the
Mm.
reason why they went to drink in the first place, which might have been depressed or feeling broken, is quite a common thing that people say they just felt broken and it's their last hope. The journey back into that can be such a dramatic crash that people really think they're broken and it's completely hopeless. They end up having two choices. One is which drink again. And so some people end up on this roundabout of every 2 months going to a ceremony so they can feel good and then crashing, or,
Mhm.
you know, and that's not healthy or helpful.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yes.
And knowing about this pathway, first of all, this journey that you go on is really important, but understanding that you're not broken, it's actually, this is where homework time kicks in. How do I bring that feeling into my everyday life? And it's not even about the feeling, like what changes do I need to make in my day to day to allow myself to be healed, to understand and actually use the things that I learned and make changes. It's about change rather than just seeing things, feeling them, and then crashing back and letting things be exactly as they are.
Yeah.
And there's two reasons why that's important. One of them, it's for sustainability. Ayahuasca isn't infinite, and the rate in which it's being used is an issue.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, they're having to go, there's places now on the planet where they're growing it out of the jungle, like Australia, South Africa,
Hmm.
possibly even the Netherlands. But yeah, there's ayahuasca farms around, but in the jungle, there's armed guards around places where people are trying to plant ayahuasca, and the thicker the vine, which means older, the more valuable it is, and so people are going deeper and deeper into the forest and hacking down the vines at the roots instead of pruning them. And it takes a lot of ayahuasca to make a small amount of drink. So this whole cycle, rinse, repeat, drink all the time mentality, A, it's not good for the plants, and B, it's not good for your mental health, because there's an addiction pattern there, addiction to the feeling of being connected to other people, when actually you need to get connected in your day-to-day life rather than in this sort of ceremonial space. So it's all about, for me, learning those lessons and actually integrating the experience. Like, one ceremony can give you enough data to process years.
Yeah, that's true. Like I said, I'm still working on asking for help.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very true.
And some people, they get to a point where nothing happens in the ceremonies, and that's ayahuasca kind of cutting you off, just saying, if you keep drinking and abusing me, I'm just not going to give you anything because you still haven't done the homework from last time. And that's really common for people. They just get cut off, and then
Wow.
they get frustrated and angry, and the ceremonies just aren't hitting the spot. And that's usually the reason why, in my opinion.
That can happen. Wow. I felt a bit actually scared about ayahuasca kind of disappearing from the Amazon. I had this feeling, oh, I hope it doesn't happen, because I really hope that also my son, who is not even 2 years old, can have that possibility when he grows up, if he chooses to, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So by the rate it's disappearing, I don't know. I felt like unsure about that. It felt very sad.
I mean, there are a lot of people, who are quite invested in it, trying to sort of help sustainability and help the indigenous in the countries in which it grows, and, protect the resources and manage it. But, it is an issue that's sort of not very spoken about. But as I said, it's also being grown in other places because it's
Yeah.
safer than trying to import it. So I
Mhm.
don't think it will ever go extinct, but just we still need to be aware of it as a resource.
Yeah. Something that came to mind is that meditations after a ceremony are really something different. They are
Mhm.
really something like I've never experienced those meditations in other times, just after a ceremony. Is there learning in that as well?
And are you talking whilst you're still in the retreat space, but like just after the effects have worn off, you're just sort of in
No, when
meditation
you're home,
when you're
basically.
home?
When you're home and you go into meditation.
Hmm. I mean, like I said, for me, the effects of neuroplasticity and the spirit of the plant stays with you for a good while.
Yeah,
And if
that's
you
why.
cultivate that relationship, you'll be able to dialogue with her for as long as you like. She's in you. You've got that connection. You've been given that connection by the shaman, as well, like where we actually have this extra level of bonding. It can be really beautiful, and that you can still access that energy. We're all connected all the time. It's often just remembering it. And so again, the ceremony gives you ways and means, and then afterwards you can learn from that. For me, another really important meditation to do is feeling the feelings that you had in ceremony, like reconnecting to the actual energy of the emotions you felt during the ceremony that were of the more uplifting, that, a lot of people experience a lot of gratitude or feeling loved in a way they've never felt loved before. Those can be quite
Mm.
common. And we can practice those feelings. We spend a lot of time practicing how to worry and how to be stressed. And we're really good at it. And our body, though there's a great book by Candace Pert, Molecules of Emotion. And it was a really groundbreaking understanding that each emotion has a chemical attached to it. And so it's a chemical reaction through our body. And so, as people know from drugs, the receptors of the cells, in the presence of a chemical, you get more receptors, so you can take in more of that chemical. And we're great with stress chemicals for that. We're like, oh, when we get addicted to it. That's why a lot of people, one of the reasons why a lot of people, when there's nothing to worry about, they don't feel quite right. And
Wow.
so they
Yeah.
find things to worry about because the body is addicted to that chemical norm. So what one great thing that ayahuasca does is it resets the system so that those you flush that out, and
Mhm.
so normal feels great instead of stress. And so if in those first few weeks you can actually meditate on the feeling of love, of gratitude, of the uplifting things you felt, your normal will reset to that. And so when you're not feeling those things, that's when something feels wrong, which is
Mm.
in my opinion a much nicer baseline to have.
I wish I'd known all this. How can people get in contact with you to get help before and after ayahuasca?
So the best place is to go to my website, which is awakenedpotential.co.uk.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that with us and for being so open about it.
My pleasure. It's really important that we connect as humans.
Mm. Yeah. Is there any last messages for someone that is planning, or maybe is kind of hearing the call of ayahuasca, but is not so sure yet, or someone maybe is planning to go on a retreat? Is there any last thoughts?
There's a document I created that we can also put in the show notes. It's
Oh,
called the
perfect.
Wonder Wheel, and it's the who, what, when, where, and why.
Okay.
It's the 5 questions you should be asking yourself before drinking. And for me, why you want to drink is extremely
Yeah.
important, as it will help you find the context which is most suited to you. Whether you need to work in a place where people are trauma informed and have the tools to help you. If you're going to be visiting really difficult times from your childhood, you need to have the right facilitators in place to then be there to help you deal with the aftermath of what might come up in your ceremonies. If you're going for physical healing, I would go to the jungle and go to where the doctors
Mm.
are, because it's a completely different experience. But everyone will have their own reasons and needs. And the other thing is, make sure you do your research and try and find the most ethical ceremonies that you can. And what that looks like is they will be asking you a lot of questions about your health, your mental health, and your family, your medications. If people aren't asking you those things, beware that they might have a space that's not particularly safe.
Good to know.
Yeah. And yeah, just think about it and feel into it. You'll know inside whether it's right for you or not. And there are practical things you need to consider. So I
Mm.
would generally suggest, talking to someone who's been there, who understands, and doing your correct preparation. And, the more you put into something, the more you get out of it. So going in with the right intention and the right feelings and the right, internal, having cleaned out your diet, cleaned out your mind beforehand, you're much more likely to have an easier physical experience with the ayahuasca. That's why the diet's
Okay.
important.
Diet beforehand. Okay.
Yeah.
So no coffee, right?
Coffee's the one thing. I mean, that's just about sensitivity. If you've got loads of caffeine in your system, you're already pushed, you're not as sensitive to other things. But
Mm.
it's more sort of, the unhealthy foods, the unhealthy data that you take in.
Okay.
She's a purgative. She's got to go in there and clean you out. So if you're dirty inside, then she's going to have harder work and have to do a lot more physical cleaning before she can get to the mental, emotional, psychological stuff that you might be looking for. So
Oh,
if you clean up first, she's got a much easier journey into your body and into your psyche.
okay, I understand. So maybe the ones that are purging a lot, or maybe there's no connection, I don't know, but some people are purging a lot.
Mhm.
Maybe they needed to go on a diet before. Can
Sometimes
it be? Yeah, okay. I understand. Thank you so much for being here with us. Really happy to have had this conversation with you, and I know where to go next time before before when I start planning going to a new ceremony. Thank you so much.
my absolute pleasure. It's been really lovely talking to you, Ada.
Thank you. Now it's your turn. Let us know what health and abundance subjects you want us to cover in the future. Do that by commenting on the post on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much to Sophia for being here with us today. If you liked it, please leave a review at podchaser.com. Just search for the podcast and write a good review. If you have questions or want to book a session with me, please do let me know on Instagram or on my website adakomani.no. In the next episode, we'll be talking about Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique developed by Dolores Cannon. And remember, you are always creating your health and abundance. What do you choose to create today?